This is landing gear. We're going to talk about landing gear on different types of aircraft, different configurations, and we're going to solve the age-old mystery of how the nose gear on the Convair B-58 Hustler retracts with that giant fuel and weapon pod right behind it. Many people have wondered about this. We're going to solve the mystery on Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. Now, this was a very tough photo to take. I was hanging onto the leading edge with my left hand and holding the camera in my right hand, and the wind blast was really, no, this is the airplane. I was sitting right there. But it makes an interesting point on how many different types of landing gear there are. Let's go back to the very beginning. The first airplanes were launched on catapult rails and landed on skids. Then came wheeled landing gear. By World War I, the configuration for gear was pretty well established. Two main wheels just forward of the wing and a skid or tail wheel in the back, and hence the term Taildragger. This design carried through. By the 1930s, aerodynamics were becoming more important. Here you see a cowled engine, and the wheels are encased in what are called wheel pants to streamline the airflow around the wheel itself. This, of course, is Wiley Post and the famed Winnie May, his world circling Lockheed Vega. The Northrop Gamma had a more sophisticated approach with a large fairing around the wheel and the strut, and the entire assembly could rise up or down for shock absorption. You can see the horizontal lines there marking the amount of travel, but it was a pretty good system. Then came retractable gear. This is a Grumman Wildcat, and you can see how the pretty basic structure would bring the wheel up flush against the fuselage, but this was a first step in trying to reduce drag by retracting the gear altogether. Another approach was to have the gear enclosed in the engine nacelle of an airliner like this DC-3. You notice that the wheel is partially extended. In the event of a belly landing, it protects the bottom of the airplane. Well, here we have a fully retractable tricycle gear. You'll notice there's one large nose wheel, one larger main wheel. How about a large nose wheel and twin main wheels? And twin nose gear and four main wheels on each bogie on the jets. And here we have 18 wheels on a 747. Then there's this airplane, the Concorde, which has a tall landing gear for ground clearance at high angles of attack. And here's the main gear with the world's first integral brake cooling system in the main wheels. I should mention that the drag strut that you see here is taller on the Concorde than the main landing gear of a Douglas DC-6. Helicopters land on skids. They have wheels as well, even retractable landing gear. This is the inboard main gear on the Airbus A380. This is an airplane that has 22 wheels total. But here's an airplane that has one wheel. And believe me, it's a lot easier to land in a crosswind on one wheel on your glider. By World War II, the fighters had been pretty well established as tail draggers. But in the early jets, they went to tricycle landing gear. Same with the bombers, equipped with tail wheels, tricycle landing gear. This is the experimental model of the B-29, but it had tricycle gear at the end of World War II, and of course, most of the bombers afterward. Although, having said that, there was bicycle landing gear, twin bogies, and outrigger wheels on the wingtips on the Martin XB-51. The Boeing B-47, probably the most well-known bicycle landing gear equipped aircraft. This is the XB-47D, which has turboprop engines on the inboard pylons and was used as a test bed. And of course, quad bicycle gear on the B-52. I should mention the gear is able to turn, rotate on the strut, and this allowed crosswind landings without having to lower a wing on the bomber. It was a very novel approach. Well, how about a bicycle tail dragger? That's right, the U-2 has a main gear, but it's landed on the tail wheel. Here we see NASA U-2 landing at Palmdale, a chase car right behind it calling altitude. But the airplane has actually landed on the tail wheel. It's a unique configuration. It's been flying since the mid-1950s. Carrier operations are a whole nother story, because now you're stopping a 50,000-pound jet traveling about 160 knots, and you're stopping the airplane in 300 feet. There's a lot of energy being dissipated, and so the gear has to be pretty robust. Here we see a NASA F-18, but has the same gear as the carrier-based airplane. And yeah, it's a pretty robust structure. The nose gear that's called a trailing arm main landing gear for shock absorption. Compare that to the T-38, which has a much simpler gear because it operates off of long concrete runways and doesn't have the need for that kind of energy dissipation. Fighters have all sorts of landing gear configurations, retracting forward, aft. And we're going to cover that in a separate video in the future. But for right now, let's look at bombers. The YB-49 flying wing was equipped with a single large nose wheel and twin main wheels. But then there were a series of airplanes that just had one large main wheel. And this was dictated pretty much by how much room was in the wing when the gear was retracted. So here's the Republic Rainbow, the XR-12 photo recon prototype. And here you can see a good view of the main landing gear, which retracted inboard and up into the wing root. It's a really good indication of the size of the tire compared to the flight crew. But the prize winner for largest main wheel has to be the XB-36. Check this out. And its sister airplane, the XC-99 cargo transport, had the same main landing gear initially. But both the XB-36 and the XC-99 were converted to a four-wheel main landing gear, and this put a better footprint on the runway. It was less stressful, smoother landings, and worked much, much better. Now, speaking of the jets, this was the XB-60, which was a jet-powered conversion of the B-36. It never went into production, but it featured a unique tail wheel, fully retractable. Now, when you think of an 18-wheeler, I'll bet you don't think of this. This is the Convair B-58 Hustler, and it had 8 small wheels and tires on each main gear, twin nose wheel. The high landing and takeoff speeds of the B-58 presented some unique problems, and there were many tire ruptures in the beginning, but the tires were pressurized to 300 PSI and filled with pure nitrogen. As mentioned, there were some problems in the beginning with tires rupturing on takeoff. Here we have a right main landing gear with tires blown, left main landing gear. These are emergency landings at Edwards, but they solved the problem by redesigning the tire and putting a flange on it to dissipate the heat. Here's a close-up of what you call a pilot having a bad day. So how does the nose wheel on a B-58 Hustler retract with that big fuel and weapon pod right behind the strut? I mean, obviously the gear is fully retractable. So how does that work? Well, through the magic of Photoshop, I'm going to show you the sequence for the retraction of the nose wheel. First, as the airplane is airborne, the weight of the airplane comes off, the oleo strut is extended. And here's what happens. There's a rail system in the nose wheel well, and the gear retracts aft and is articulated as you see here. Mystery solved. That's how the gear is retracted and is extended on the B-58 Hustler. So there you have it, a quick overview of landing gear, different configurations, and how the B-58 system works. Special thanks to the great folks who allow these videos to be possible. My dear friend Tony Landis, the Douglas Library, and the Wings and Air Power Historical Archive. Thank you for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't subscribed, we'd love having you on board. Please do hit the like button on the way out. And as always, until next time, take care.